how NOVRITSCH actually rebrands the guns. Grab a coffee and let's do a deep dive into this. In January 2017, the SSG-24 hit the market, and for the first time in history, a regular airsofter could get a solid sniper rifle out of the box. This dramatically cut the skill cap needed to get into airsoft sniping and enabled many players to try what was so hard to do before. The SSP-1, a gas pistol, followed soon after. 6 years later, there are more than 20 different replicas brought to the market by NOVRITSCH. However, this wasn't without some question marks raised from parts of the community. With some hundreds of negative comments on the way NOVRITSCH produces the new replicas, we figured it's about time we take a look at the actual way NOVRITSCH brings replicas to the market. Now, let us walk you through the process of gun development rarely shared in the airsoft industry. Part 1. Ideas. All products start with an idea. For example, we've witnessed the progress made within the Hong Kong Speedsoft community. Their 1,000 to 3,000 USD high kappa pistols were on pair and even better than your average AEG at that time. This was mostly due to the heavy customization. Yet our development team felt like those mods could be streamlined into mass production and brought to the market for a fraction of the price. That is just one idea. This one paved the way for the SSP-5. These ideas do not come out of thin air. In most cases, they are based on a need for something that is not available for airsoft at the moment. With about 70 people at NOVRITSCH, there is always something somebody is missing. This can be anything from a specific type of an airsoft replica all the way down to a lack of proper way to refill a gas magazine during the game. All these situations spark ideas. Take the SSG-96 for example. The L96 platform has been a popular one for a long time, and for a good reason. With many cultural references ranging from movies to video games, the airsoft version always lacked a reliable rifle that would not feel like a toy and could actually hop heavy BBs at a decent range. However, the fact that one person is missing a product on the market is still far away from development greenlight. The reason for that is actually very simple. Bringing a new product to the market can be surprisingly expensive. Looking back at the SSP-5, if you had to develop it only ever to create one replica, the price tag would have swung over a staggering $200,000. That's almost as much as a new Ferrari Roma. That's why not all ideas make it out there. For example, we've had this cyberpunk-looking high-capacity AEG, 5,000 round magazine on a build that looks unlike a real gun. An idea that would have definitely found some fans. However, it's not something most of us would really want in our closets. Moreover, with such a specific design, the chance of making it within a reasonable price range was seen as slim. So we just went away from it. With so much money invested in a single product, it is no wonder that every idea has to go through a proper review before the modern day equivalent of a drawing board is put to use. Each of these ideas has to first pass through Christoph to enter the process at all. But still, before real work is started, there is another major hurdle for an idea: a feasibility review. How does it work? Well, let's let Christoph explain.
In the brainstorm, there is then in the end a kind of a conclusion, where towards the end we get more realistic, like could this even be made and so on. But it's still quite vague, yeah. We write this down, and then usually a few days pass where everyone kind of sleeps on this brainstorm meeting, and then there's a kickoff meeting. And the kickoff meeting goes through a very rigorous template, which is budget for tooling, who's gonna make it, potential suppliers, hard required features, then success criteria, how many we expect to sell, how many do we buy for batch 1. So it's like, I don't want to go through everything, but I think it's 50 lines that just need to be filled out. Requirement, operating environment, operating temperature, from minimum temperature to maximum temperature. And just we go through the whole thing, and this is then kind of like stamped off by product manager, team lead, department lead. We all say, okay, we agree to this, and then this must not be changed unless everyone agrees to it again. Part
2. Design process. Upon ensuring that the idea is realistically achievable, a marathon begins. For example, the kickoff meeting for the SSG-96 Mark II happened more than 2 years before it made its way into the warehouse. The SSP-5 took 1.5 years to research and develop, and another 1.5 years to bring into production. That's actually 3 years from the idea to you being able to buy that thing. That's a really long time. From this point, it is time to bring out 3D modeling and design know-how. From our initial brainstorming meeting, we have a set of requirements for each of the design projects. For instance, the SSP5 entry requirements, including the lightest slide assembly possible, split slide for a fixed red dot, hop-up lifting at least 0.4 gram BBs, and a few others. Knowing these parameters, you also know where to go next with designing. If we follow the SSP5 development, it is obvious that we need to basically rebuild the slide assembly while we are allowed to keep a lot of the pistol grip and trigger group. And that's exactly what happened. The first prototype of the SSP5 was an SSP1 with a reworked slide, longer, full of 3D printed parts, and the original milled SSP1 slide. Surprisingly enough, these prototypes, even though heavily 3D printed, can shoot. Maybe not 10,000 shots, but still enough to give you an idea of the experience one will get. This is what we call an engineering sample. Long story short, it is a gun prototype that is fully built by engineers, mostly in Vienna. Sometimes a CNC workshop or a factory may help us with some parts, but it's mostly just us. Unsurprisingly, this one replica usually undergoes multiple rounds of changes based on what we see and check. Also, from now on, for every sample from engineering all the way to mass production, a NOVRITSCH gun has to go through our internal QC list. More on that later in this video, but doing a full QC on one gun takes one person between 1 and 2 days. That's a long time.
Once that is done and you can shoot a BB and it's kind of like, hey, this is, I could take this to a field, then it runs through a very, very, very long QC protocol, which checks steps like, does it work at 15 degrees temperature? Does it work at 40 degrees temperature? What if you drop it from a meter? Does it fit into a high caliber holster? Does it fit typical pistol flashlights? Does it shoot it accurate enough? Can it lift the PB that we required in the kickoff meeting? What is the FPS deviation? What is the total power? Is it within where we want it?
Part 3. Finding manufacturing capacity. With an engineering sample good to go, both in function and QC, it is time to find suppliers. But before we do that, it might be a good idea to explain the manufacturing environment in airsoft. You see, most of the airsoft equipment is made in Asia. With decades of local experience, good manufacturing hardware, and a skilled labor market, it is the best place to turn new designs into real, actual products. There is, however, an airsoft twist. In short, airsoft guns are considered guns by many legal standards, and anything you do with guns on your manufacturing level means regulation, and a lot of it. For instance, in places like the People's Republic of China, you cannot even transport a gun part between places, let alone easily create a new airsoft factory. And there are a lot of other issues, legal and logistical. That's why NOVRITSCH doesn't own a factory. As a matter of fact, many brands out there don't own one either. They simply go to the existing factories to see if they can make the product and live up to the QC standard. For this very reason, with every airsoft gun or any development project, we go around the market and cherry pick the best possible facility for it. The ideal supplier may be different for each project, depending on a plethora of factors such as experience with manufacturing, the given thing we want to make, existing machinery, part molds, etc. Speaking of part molds, these are essentially forms used in mass production, custom made, each costing up to 5-digit prices. Unsurprisingly, the more molds, changes and adjustment your design needs, the more money the development process costs. That's why with oldest NOVRITSCH designs, you could see a bit of less innovation, sheerly due to the size of the project a young company could take on. To give this into more specific shape, the same factory that manufactured the SSP1 got to make the higher-end SSP5 high kappa. The reason was simple. Besides years of experience, there were already molds which you couldn't transport anywhere else, as well as QC processes and a few other parts that were time-proven and could partially be reused for the SSP5. But as Chris explains, that's not everything.
SSP5, for example, we need to know who makes a good, like the lower is, we can use many existing parts, right? But for the upper, everything is going to be from scratch. So we don't look for a supplier with a good high kappa upper because we don't care. We throw the whole thing out anyways, right? And we change everything. But we look for someone who has a good lower. Yeah, we need a grip that looks modern. We need steel sears, Picatinny rail at the bottom. For example, here in this case, the supplier did not have a flat trigger. We wanted a flat trigger, but there's a certain budget we have to work with. So we said, yeah, we can run with it. Still looks modern enough. It's it's not like a 1911 looking trigger. It's already 2011 looking trigger, so we can roll with it.
Overall, it is always crucial to work with manufacturers that have some experience with the type of product, as it would be very hard to go around having to explain how to use an airsoft chronograph or what hop-up is.
These factories became very, very good at copying Marie products and improving on them, but sometimes they miss the player feedback and the drive for innovation. For them, it's kind of like, yeah, this sells, and they kind of looking towards what Maru is doing, and they like a new product. Okay, let's go to town. Let's copy this. Yeah.
We are coming to part 4, factory sampling and pre-production. Now that we know what we are making and with whom, it is time to fire up the machines and get to work. Nope, not really. Don't forget that at this moment, you only have a prototype fine-tuned as a single piece, only one unit. This is where factory sample is built. In short, it could also be called the mold making process. At this point, we take our prototype and order molds for each of the parts. Then the factory uses them to make a factory sample and assemble it, which, surprise, surprise, almost never works together. Also, this is the moment when funny stuff can happen. Take the SSG-96 for example. When the factory built the first sample, we saw that there is an empty mag indicator and it was broken, showing the magazine was empty when it wasn't. Talking to the factory, we realized that they thought this thing is there to hold the barrel better in place, putting in a spring the other way around. We went and explained the function to them, and since the factory also manufactures other L96s, they fixed it for those two. So, funny enough, there is NOVRITSCH influence in other brands' replicas as well. Anyways, this process throws us down a spiral of small adjustments to the molds, CNC instructions, and sometimes even the original design. When we screw it up and don't notice in the first place. File away a bit, manufacture one more, see if it fits, and repeat a few times. That gets us to a single replica made in a way a mass production would be working. When we push through that phase, it's time to go big. Did I say big? I meant 20 pieces for the pre-production phase. You see, with a factory sample, it may happen that the manufacturing tolerances just made it to work for that one piece. But what if you want to create 3,000 of them? Well, imagine coming up to our office tech friends and saying, please, fix my 3,000 airsoft guns because we screwed up. Yeah, not a dream job. To prevent us from harming our own techs, we do this pre-production phase. Replicas are made using the exact same line and methods we'd use for mass production. These pre-production samples go through the full QC protocol, full pre-production batch. Part 5, quality control. Okay, we've put this part of the process aside for a long enough time. Let's take a look at the QC. Over the years, our internal QC protocol grew substantially for each of the main gun types. In general, there are 2 QC processes a gun can go through. The first one, every gun goes through a basic QC process. Stuff like whether it operates normally, the hop-up works, a bolt pulls smoothly, or the operation is seamless, etc. However, for roughly 1% of each of the batch, the full QC protocol is used. As mentioned earlier, one gun can take up to 2 days for one person to fully quality check. If you take 1,500 pieces in a batch, you can clearly see how one person can work a month just to QC and greenlight this one batch. And that's only if nothing goes wrong. Why does it take so long? Well, the list drags to roughly 200 singular items, one of which can be things like shoot the gun 10,000 times. Actually, 10,000 times. That one is real. And to ensure it actually happens, this QC is being recorded with our own QC camera rolling all the time. After all, if you shoot a 5-joule sniper rifle 5,000 times, one might want to call it a day and just skip the rest. And we cannot have that. And of course, there are other things to test, since the list has been growing. Above that, we test for all sorts of things that you might not expect. For instance, somebody has to drop our replica more than 10 times from different angles onto concrete to test durability. Or we test stuff like BB damage, meaning whether BB shot in the water has any marks from the inside of the gun, or whether the gun chronos consistently. And guess what happens if one of those guns fails somewhere? The entire batch will have that failure checked. After all, having a 10% failure rate would be an actual disaster, leaving Reddit on fire. Part 6. Mass production, finally. Anyways, with QC greenlighted on a pre-production sample, the time has to come to pull the trigger on mass production. The factory gets to work, at which point one of our most thorough quality control processes kicks in. Now, in short, throughout mass production, we do a total of 5 quality control checks. That is one of the things we at NOVRITSCH aim to do better than the other options on the market. To be all fair and square, a disclaimer is in place. A QC process, more than other parts of development, is a thing of constant improvement. The level of control was not always the same as few years back when NOVRITSCH was a considerable smaller company. We could simply not afford to have multiple people on the ground in the factories. That has now changed, allowing us to step up the game. Let me explain how. As mentioned earlier, there are 5 steps of quality control. When the factory manufactures enough pieces of all the replica parts to start assembling anything, our team jumps in with the first check. That allows us to review the quality of all the internals easily, because they are still disassembled. Next up, as soon as the first mass production pieces get assembled, we do a quick check on the quality of assembly. You know, stuff like there is enough screw glue, if everything is tight enough, if screws are not stripped, etc. Having passed both of these checks, we let the production proceed, only to stop it again at 50% of the batch. At that point, we go in depth, with the goal of running the replica through the full QC list. For each of the tests in our hundreds tests long list, we select a number of replicas that have to pass. These tests include stuff like power deviation, smooth cycling, full disassembly, etc. For production, this is a critical breaking point. If we spot an issue, well, it's a fuck up, but still a manageable one. After all, it's easier to fix 50% of the batch rather than the entirety of it. But that luckily doesn't happen too often. When that is done, and the batch has been manufactured, there are still 2 more checks. In short, 1 more happens in the factory. There we double check everything on roughly 10 to 20 guns. Full visual, packaging and functional check. That includes stuff like hop up, motor, spring exchange, chrono, shooting tests, etc. Just to be sure. Then, when we ship the goods to the Austrian warehouse, the team that developed the gun in Vienna takes a few samples to do a last sanity check. This team also has to greenlight that their product, a project they have been pushing for over a year at least, is now ready to hit the shelves. After all those checks and work, you can finally go through the 4-click process of ordering a NOVRITSCH replica. You wait a few days and are good to go. Well, what if you are not? Despite the QC complexity, this may happen. After all, you cannot take all 5,000 pistols to the field for 2 weeks, since that would be overkill. Plus, you cannot sell a used gun. So what happens when people stumble upon something? Let Chris give an example.
If a part breaks after a certain amount, it's not always all guns, because if it would be all guns, we would have found it, yeah. But it can be that 1% of the guns after 12,000 shots, the seal breach inside the SP5 breaks, yeah. Then we revise that part for the second batch, and we always offer that revised part as a spare part for existing customers. Yeah. And if needed, if it's really a big issue, then we also send out emails to all customers, say, okay, consider, here's this part, we usually sell it for manufacturing price then, like €3 or something. You can get it even if your pistol is still running. Consider changing this part because it's gonna last.
So, what is the truth? Does NOVRITSCH just rebrand guns? I will let you be the judge. Guns are usually not created from scratch, that is correct. Not just for NOVRITSCH, but for the entire airsoft industry. And honestly, when it comes to guns, not just in the airsoft industry. Yet we do our best to improve and innovate whenever reasonable, using our experience from the field that factories cannot simply get. We played airsoft around the world and talked to many of you to see what you guys need. And we do our best to deliver just that. Whew, this story was a bit longer than usual. However, we think that it is not something you come across every day. Let us know if you liked it and how you imagine this to go. We will be curious in the comments. See you in the next one.